Ah, flat earth videos. They just keep on coming. They don't get any better. We just get more of them. If you hear a child screaming in the background, don't mind it. There's not much I can do about that. He's playing Fortnite right now. But the video that we're responding to today is a video from Jeranism. Not just any video from Jeranism. It's a video from Jeranism where he shows a snippet of a podcast that he was on where he presents his own video. So this is a video of Jaron on a podcast of Jaron on a video from Jaron. Yeah, I know, that's crazy. It's a bit of a backwards way of doing it. And I know that I could have traced back and went to the original video that Jaron made, but I decided to respond to this video specifically for a number of reasons. Not the least of which being that this is the first one I came across and I couldn't be bothered, but also because he seems to actually do a decent job of recapping the original video, even though he just takes a 45-minute video and put it into like 30 minutes. So, I mean, not much of a point there. But I also just kind of wanted to show you guys what it was like, what it's like to actually watch and go through these flat earth videos. Because I'll often try to find the best flat earth videos where they present their point clearly, they get to the point, something that's actually bearable to sit through, and I try to cut to the most relevant parts where they explain their points the clearest and in the most concise way. But it isn't always like that. Sometimes it's just a video of a podcast of a video. So this is that.
So first I show the Wikipedia article for Dr. Robert Sungenis, and I point out that in the very first line of the Wikipedia, it states that he is known for his advocacy of the pseudoscientific belief that the Earth is the center of the universe. So then I point out that a little further down it states Sungenis has questioned the number of people who died in slave camps during World War II, and so they labeled him as an anti-Semite.
But he was an anti-Semite, and there's more to it than just the borderline Holocaust denial. If you were to have read the next sentence, then you would know that he, quote, wrote about the involvement of Jews and Israel in a Zionist satanic conspiracy aimed at Satan ruling the world. And if you were to go to one of the sources that are cited, you can clearly see the anti-Semitism, not only from just the things that he says in his quotes in general, but also the fact that he plagiarized from a white supremacist and even Nazi propaganda. This doesn't have much to do with the rest of the video, but it was so easy to just read the next sentence, and this kind of just goes to show the sort of jumping to conclusions that we can expect for the rest of the video.
Also, still further, it says, according to Sungenis, he became interested in this pseudoscientific belief that blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you see, he doesn't read much more than the first sentence of every paragraph, and he gets hung up on it. Is this the sort of research you do as a flat earther?
Of course, this is sleight of hand, and no one would actually think that according to Sungenis, he became interested in the pseudoscientific belief. No, could have said, according to Sungenis, he became interested in the topic or began to research the idea. But no, they make it very clear what will happen professionally if any researcher questions the standard narrative. If you question that the Earth is moving around the sun, you're pseudoscientific. If you question the standard narrative of World War II, you'll be labeled an anti-Semite.
You act as if Wikipedia saying so is the only reason we would see geocentrism as pseudoscientific. Modern-day geocentrism is pseudoscientific because some conspiracy theorists will present it as genuine scientific fact, as you're doing right now, when in fact it is not. It really is at odds with astronomy and physics at large, but guys like you will present it as scientific fact, though I suppose we're getting to the specifics.
So this is why I find those who do extremely brave, as they put their search for truth ahead of social acceptance, kind of like what we all do as flat earthers.
Okay, yeah, we get the point. I hope you don't mind, but I'm gonna skip ahead a bit.
So needless to say, Robert has been demonized for his research into this very important topic.
I don't know about you, but I kind of just assume that someone's a bit loony if they make YouTube videos in this style.
Thank you. How do you like them, apples?
I'm glad you came back on topic on your own. So, you seem to have discovered the flaw in the argument.
Okay, but seriously, he was demonized for all of the anti-Semitism, and there was a lot of it at one point in time. The guy's just a hardcore Catholic, and that seems to be the basis of most of his beliefs and conspiracy theories. But he's not exactly a scientist, nor has he done any scientific research, experiments, tests, or anything. And Jaron goes on about something, I don't really know, but I'm going to skip ahead to the relevant parts.
We got Carl Sagan, who says if we're not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who will tell us something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we are up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes along rambling. So it's kind of funny that in this little quote by Carl Sagan, he leaves out the fact that this same can be true for scientific beliefs and understandings. If Robert Sungenis is not able to ask skeptical questions, or we aren't, without being labeled as pseudoscience, without being called an anti-Semite, then we are just up for grabs for the next charlatan, aka a science class, if you will, social class, who comes along saying that we must believe everything that they say is true.
If you were to look at the context of that quote, you would find that Sagan actually says pretty much exactly that. He pretty much says what you say he doesn't. Here is a snippet of the interview where this quote is from.
I mean, who is running the science and technology in a democracy if the people don't know anything about it? And the second reason that I'm worried about this is that science is more than a body of knowledge. It's a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility. If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along. It's a thing that Jefferson lay great stress on. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
So this sort of thinking is part of science itself. So as you can see, Sagan wasn't exactly against questioning scientific ideas or questioning what the government tells us. But the thing is, flat earthers, or geocentrists, because apparently they're the same thing now, they're not looked down upon because they're questioning these things, because they're researching and looking into these things. In fact, I admire that you're researching and trying to understand even simple things like the shape of the Earth. Genuine skepticism I'm okay with, but skepticism isn't the same thing as denial. Now, I don't know Jeranism's specific ideas in regards to the flat Earth, but when flat earthers in general do things like deny the existence of gravity and insist that buoyancy can replace it, they really show that they don't know what they're talking about, because they obviously don't understand that gravity causes buoyancy in the first place and that buoyancy only pushes things up. So buoyancy cannot replace gravity, and saying stuff like that are what make people think that flat earthers are ridiculous. So, I ask you, what is the difference between a scientist and a charlatan? I'm not actually going to answer that question, but I just want you to think about how to recognize someone who acts or maybe even feels like he knows more than he really does.
Oh, this is where I was just telling people the point of the video was for you to decide by the end of the video which belief is correctly described as pseudoscience. We just looked at the definition of it, but I figured it should be pretty easy to figure out which belief is not based on the scientific method. Is it the belief that the Earth spins, or the belief that it does not?
Is it the beliefs held by all scientists? Physicists, cosmologists, astronomers, both professional and amateur, for thousands of years? Or is it the beliefs held by a subset of conspiracy theorists and YouTubers? Which one really has science figured out? Okay, granted, it isn't enough to say that scientists say so, but I hope we're getting to a point where I can prove you wrong, because we're about 6 minutes into Jaron's video, And we haven't gotten to the point of the video, the point being which one really is pseudoscience.
Because remember, we are all taught that the Earth goes around the sun, and we're taught that as fact. Well, once you listen to this entire PDF, you would see that all tests, and I mean all tests, have showed that the Earth did not move through space or around the sun. You have to understand that Einstein then comes along when tests showed the Earth didn't move. And so what tests or experiments did good old Albert do to show those tests were wrong and actually prove that it does move? The answer is none. He did no experiments, no tests. He introduced transform mathematical equations to make it so one would still believe that the Earth moves.
Ah, I see what's going on here. This is just another pretty common flat earther misunderstanding of science. Okay, before we had an understanding of relativity, we thought that light traveled through a substance that wasn't really a substance, that we called luminiferous aether, right? And we thought that the whole solar system was moving through this luminiferous aether, right? That means that from the ground, relative to us, it would seem like this luminiferous aether was traveling past us. And this is a phenomenon that we called aether wind. Then, experiments such as Airy's failure attempted to detect this aether wind. And they didn't. The results were negative. At first, this seemed to indicate that the Earth wasn't moving through this aether, and hence the stationary Earth idea. But later on, with experiments such as the Michelson-Morley experiment, we would find out that this aether didn't actually exist in the first place. Now, this had huge ramifications because this was the biggest and a very widely accepted hypothesis at the time, and this left a huge gap in our knowledge. And, after this all happened, there were several hypotheses suggested, and amongst those is where Einstein came along and more or less explained everything with both special and general relativity. Now, yes, his theories did indeed start out as a hypothesis, because that's how science works. We start with a hypothesis, then we test it to figure out whether or not it's true. And sure enough, later observations and experiments and tests would indeed go on to prove him correct. Not only do you really misunderstand the concept of the stationary aether, not only have you grossly oversimplified the origin of the theory of relativity, not only have you ignored the fact that this luminiferous aether has been proven not to exist, but you are more than 130 years behind the science, stuck between a still aether and the aether not existing. You're using a gross misrepresentation and misunderstanding of science more than a century old to prove your conspiracy theory. And you're trying to prove that your ideas aren't pseudoscientific? To prove that this is indeed what he's talking about, I'm going to skip ahead a bit. Trust me, he doesn't really say anything meaningful in the meantime.
Let's continue on. I don't know if people know that Einstein said this. If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. That's an easy way to make the Earth move.
A simple Google search will show that this isn't a real quote at all, and you're presenting it as if it is.
Then you can get into a little bit of the quotes that I put into the video itself. Albert Michelson talking about his experiment that says this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation which presupposes that the Earth moves. So we've got the person who did the experiment saying, nope, the Earth doesn't move, not in our experiments.
Meanwhile, the actual quote says, this conclusion directly contradicts the explanation of the phenomenon of aberration, which has been hitherto generally accepted, and which presupposes that the Earth moves through the ether, the latter remaining at rest. So this is exactly what I was talking about. This right here is the Michelson-Morley experiment that I mentioned earlier. Actually, I was wrong on this one. This was actually the Michelson experiment, which Michelson did alone before the Michelson-Morley experiment. In fact, the Michelson-Morley experiment was a repeat of this, because I believe this was not accurate enough or not precise enough, whatever the case was. But yeah, my point still stands.
You've got physicist Arthur Eddington saying there was only one alternative. The Earth's true velocity through space might happen to be nil. Again, these are physicists. These are guys doing the experiments.
But let's look at his next sentence, which was, this was ruled out by repeating the experiment 6 months later, since the Earth's motion could not be nil on both occasions. So, this is cherry-picked, devoid of all context, and obviously presented in a misleading way. And this was in a book where he explains the origin of relativity, and he advocates for it, for crying out loud. Hell, this was one of the earliest guys to confirm general relativity. Surely you cannot be this dense.
You've got the data of Michelson Mairley were almost unbelievable. There was only one other possible conclusion to draw, that the Earth was at rest. Physicist Bernard Jaffe.
And his next sentence was, this, of course, was preposterous. A bit further down, it says, his conclusion was short and unmistakable. The hypothesis of a stationary ether is erroneous, he wrote. Again, this is a guy talking about the Michelson-Morley experiment in a book that explains relativity and its origins, and advocates for it. He says the exact opposite of what you're trying to force him to say. Jeranism goes on, and I could too, but I think you get the point. I honestly don't know at this point if Jeranism is a troll or not, because throughout all of this, Jeranism is constantly trying to get you to think about pseudoscience, and he's trying to get you to agree with him that relativity is obviously pseudoscience, and that his idea of a stationary Earth and of geocentrism is indeed actual science. Ironically, in doing so, he created a propaganda piece that grossly misunderstands and misrepresents science more than a century old, downplays huge scientific advancements as if they were never proven. And he proceeds to give you quotes that are cherry-picked, stripped of all relevant context, and warped to mean the exact opposite of their intention, and occasionally just plain falsely attributed, all while presenting himself as the rational, skeptic, and scientific one. Now, let me ask you, dear viewer, is that not pseudoscience? And the person who would present you with such a thing, is he not a charlatan?
Over on this right side, we've got pseudoscience consists of statements, beliefs, or practices that are claimed to be both scientific and factual, but are incompatible with the scientific method. But I figured it should be pretty easy to figure out which belief is not based on the scientific method. Is it the belief that the Earth spins, or the belief that it does not?